Hello and welcome to the 16th episode of Beyond the Present podcast. My name is Daniel Morgan. I'm here joined by Pujix live from Canada. Hey there, my man. How's it going?
Life is great. How are you?
I am doing terrific. And of course, we have a new guest on board. He's an expert on a lot of great topics that you will soon hear about. And his name is Govind Mohan. So Govind, how are you doing?
Great. Nice to be on here.
It's a pleasure. So Govind, why don't you go ahead right now and tell our listeners about yourself a little bit so that they can somehow know who you are and what you're up to.
So I'm a CS philosophy and economics student at U of T, double major and minor in that order.
Wow.
And I've been interested in cryptocurrencies for quite a while. It started out when I was poking around in the deep web about four years ago, and then I found out about Bitcoin, which is the currency on the deep web. And I was like, what's Bitcoin? So that got me down a deep rabbit hole, which involved a lot of things that I at the time couldn't really wrap my mind around. I'm referencing the Satoshi Nakamoto's paper. If for those who don't know, Satoshi Nakamoto is the anonymous guy or girl or whoever who just came out and posted this paper that said Bitcoin, that proposed Bitcoin as a peer-to-peer decentralized cryptocurrency, which kind of rocked the world, and the effects of which we're only just feeling now. So in terms of what I'm doing right now, I am working at a cryptocurrency-based fantasy sports website, but I'm also excited to say that I will be launching my own venture in September.
Wow.
We have been accepted to the U of T's Creative Destruction Lab, which is an incubator where I will be making a decentralized data exchange platform where users, anyone can sell their data to small and medium companies, and they choose who they want to sell their data to.
Wow.
And companies can access our network of decentralized data scientists, and they can make data-driven decisions the same level that like Trump and Hillary and all these people make at the high level using A/B testing, using tons of data. Any mom and pop family business would be able to do it. That's the goal, at least.
That's wonderful.
So that's what I'll be working
Before I
for.
go any further, though, you mentioned something about deep web, and I heard a little bit about that concept. So, first of all, what were you doing, toiling around deep web? And because generally speaking, I'm kind of curious about right now, like why you wanted to play around with this whole deep web before you discovered Bitcoin.
Well, I was always a really curious kid, and when I hung out in the more questionable parts of the normal web, I found out references to the deep web. So I'm like, hey,
for our listeners right now who might not know what deep web actually means, would you just right now go ahead and tell us the definition
of the deep web?
That's right.
So the deep web, the clear web is basically all the internet that you can access every day using Google, all the websites that are listed on Google. But there are in any case, you're just accessing a computer that's located somewhere in the world, and you are making requests to that computer throughout the internet, and then your requests are routed through this huge, massive traffic of data packets that ultimately reach that computer.
That's right.
But with the deep web, there's a level of encryption, so nobody knows what your message is and where it is going except for the person who sends it and the person who receives it. So only the sender and the receiver actually know what's going on and what information is being requested. And if I intercept the data packets in the middle, it's just going to look like a bunch of cryptographic stuff, which doesn't really say anything.
Pretty amazing. I heard a lot of stuff also about deep web in terms of, let's just be honest, some criminal activities and whatnot, things they can do over there. But overall, I'm pretty sure that your experimentation with the deep web was not bordering on the criminal. It was just for the sake of learning and education. That's what I personally can assume right now, given the fact that you want to start your own business. So it's pretty good to know about this.
Right. It actually gets like this really crazy reputation of being like, oh, this is where all the hackers hang out, but it's really not that interesting. A lot of it is just broken web pages and some weird websites with some people writing blog posts, and it's really the same thing as the normal internet, except it's just anonymous.
Wow. Pretty amazing. Good point. Never been to deep web myself, quite frankly, but seems quite exhilarating. Now let's move on to our topic today, which is about keychain technology as well as the entire decentralized world as a whole. So let's start first with Pujix here. Pujix, how do you define keychain technology?
Sorry, what was that? Blockchain technology?
Sorry, blockchain technology. That's right. Blockchain technology.
Right. So honestly, I'm not too much of an expert in this area. I just know that that's the basis of all the cryptocurrencies, that Bitcoin being one of the famous ones, that we use that platform, that system to basically be able to communicate and send and receive those. I think that is a very good question for Govind, though.
That's right. Because we both, I mean, literally, for Pujix, he at least knows the goddamn name. I don't even know the fucking name. I thought it's called the keychain technology, but it's called actually the blockchain technology. Think about it. Blockchain. So right now, let's move on to Govind here. So you are the expert. What is exactly blockchain technology?
Okay, so at the most basic level, if I'm saying I owe you like $50, right, and I write down the transaction, and then you say, okay, I trust you to maintain this transaction. There's no reason for me to, not screw you over and be like, oh, I don't know what you're talking about. I never gave you that. I never took $50 from you, and I don't owe you anything. But with a blockchain, this same ledger of transactions is maintained by 5 different people, say, or 50, or how many ever, And if it's in the same scenario, if I say I don't owe you anything because it's not there on my ledger, then everyone else would be like, okay, we have the copy of the same ledger, but here it says you got $50 from your friend and you have to pay him back. So what it is just a ledger that's maintained across many different people. And for any addition or any operation that changes that ledger, it needs to be approved by everyone first, or at least not necessarily everyone, but there's a majority is how it goes typically. So it's just a consensus-driven decision-making platform.
Interesting. So it's a platform, and it could be used in a variety of ways. But since you're an expert in terms of Bitcoin and whatnot, you mentioned earlier about this whole thing. So what exactly is the Bitcoin?
So Bitcoin is the most, I would say, primitive use case of the blockchain. It's just using a currency that whose each transaction is accounted for on a decentralized ledger. So it's just, I'm defining some currency, some store of value, which is stored on this distributed ledger, the blockchain that I described to you earlier. And when new transactions are put into a block, which wait to be included into the blockchain or the overall ledger. So this process, how it works, is that there are many miners who are solving cryptographic puzzles with their computers. I mean, they're not doing anything. The humans aren't doing anything. It's the computers solving
my goodness.
Cryptographic puzzles.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, and and they have to guess the certain the answer to a cryptographic puzzle that's posed by the network. The first computer that guesses it correctly unlocks this reward Bitcoin and approves all the transactions. So basically, there are all these miners, quote unquote, are incentivized to actually maintain the transactions and to update the ledger. So going back to the thing I mentioned earlier, they're incentivized to check all the past transactions are good and to include and to decide whether to include or not include any new transactions. So in this process, they get paid a reward.
Wow. Interesting. Quite frankly, sounds fascinating. Let's move on to Pujix here. So Pujix, what is your own perspective regarding this entire technology, the blockchain technology, cryptocurrencies, and this thing? What is your perspective overall? Is this something that you personally find interesting, or do you would like to actually invest your money in it?
Well, it's definitely a very interesting, area. And when you talk about like whether I would actually go and invest my money in it, I wouldn't really, because at this point it doesn't have I think the idea behind it worth investing in, but not necessarily an avenue. For example, Bitcoin is just one currency, right? So I wouldn't know how Bitcoin will turn up. But then the idea of decentralization in general, and specifically in currencies, is actually very fascinating to me. And I would really like to know how it pans out. But I do not have the confidence to go and invest my money in one of these currencies.
Interesting.
Cryptocurrencies.
Govind, I'm going to ask you right now, you yourself, we recently saw this whole, Bitcoin bubble burst, and it wasn't a long time ago, actually. It was, I'm guessing it was back in March or something. So what do you think about this whole cryptocurrency? Do you yourself trust and believe in this currency?
Well, I think that's the big problem that's stopping. As Puya mentioned, the idea behind the blockchain is abstracted. It's not what people understand these days. They only see it as a security because that's the face of it that has been provided, and I think that has to do with a lot of the whales in the market, who they control enough Bitcoin to actually fluctuate its price. So they cause it to reduce the price first, and then they see the surge, like a huge surge of transactions coming, or like people actually buying it, and then they just drop the price and short sell it, and they end up profiting a lot.
Wow.
But it screws over all these people who invested their money, right?
Exactly.
So it's they're just looking at it for the monetary incentive, but which is kind of frustrating for people like me who are actually trying to leverage this platform, because it's just going to put spokes in people's confidence or ability to trust it.
Interesting.
And that's something. That's something that's only going to change through good applications coming out.
Interesting. So, Govind, I'm going to ask you right now. You yourself, imagine you have some cash on the side. Would you, at this time, at this very time and moment, would you invest your money in basically cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin?
Well, it depends. Now there are a whole bunch of, I think there's about more than 2,000 cryptocurrencies.
Oh,
and
my goodness. How can you learn
week.
about all these? Oh, my. The conversion, the exchange rate. Oh, my goodness.
Exactly. It's pretty nuts. So it's almost like a whole ecosystem of countries.
Wow.
But each representing some kind of commodity or utility. But yeah, to build that up, I would invest in some tokens that I think have genuine value. At this point, I don't see the investment aspect of Bitcoin. Although I do hold Bitcoin, Ethereum, and a few other currencies, I don't see that as the main purpose of it. And I think if I were to put more of my money into just the security aspect of it, I would be kind of being a hypocrite. So I guess my answer to that would be no.
Interesting.
But,
good point. That's right. I thought so, because that's what I heard from a lot of my friends who also used to invest in basically primarily in mining Bitcoin. I remember a lot of my friends showed a tremendous amount of interest in mining Bitcoin, but now they actually stopped it. So let's move on to Pujix here. Let's talk about this whole decentralized world, because let's be honest, guys, our world is changing, not just by technology, but by this whole decentralized approach to it. So, Pujix, how do you think our lives are going to be affected by this decentralized focus of the new communication technologies?
I think when you go to technology, actually, decentralization of technology and everything that we get to, like open sourcing and all that, is basically the definition of democracy. So if you really believe in democracy, that is what it is. I'm not saying it's flawless. Neither is democracy. But then we like democracy in general in this world today very much, and we praise it. So that's the point. Like when people go and open source a program or decentralize. So for example, right now the currencies of a country is basically backed by the government, by the central banks. So it's not really decentralized. Essentially, a government is holding power over the currency, over the value of it, etc., as we talked about in the previous episode. In basically in economies, economies are basically man-made things, and that's the idea. So when we can actually give this power, I know it's a cliche, but if we can give this power back to people, then we are basically democratizing it in a sense.
Exactly.
Wow.
Yeah, so that's amazing. Why I like this concept, yeah.
Interesting. So let's move on to you, Govind. So what do you think about this decentralized world that we're currently facing?
Yeah, so to build up to what Puya said, I think right now the way we have it, it's a bunch of people controlling the average person. And, it's not that that's inherently a bad thing, it's just the fact that it's easy to corrupt. With if you add the layer of tech as a mediator, we could move towards something as more communistic, where people say that it's kind of like an ideal, right? But if you have tech mediating the transfer of funds between people and just to allow decision making, you would have the perfect, almost a utopian combination of decision making power across just a democratic decision making, and also just people actually having their voice heard. without corruption or any of these other things. But again, I realize that this may sound idealistic, and I think we're just in the early days, so it's important to see how it plays out.
That's right. It does sound a lot utopian from my perspective. And throughout history, I mean, we've never had this thing called decentralized, right? Because we've always had, like, even back in the caveman age, like, we had like a caveman leader who then led this entire tribe, then went hunting and, got the animals and whatnot. So I think that we are now heading towards, are you saying that we're heading towards a world that has no leader whatsoever and that we're all going to live like chaotically? And, because this to me sounds, somehow it doesn't sound sustainable, because for centuries,
I would say
humanity started, we were all living in tribes and we had leaders.
Right, but it's not like we would have no leaders. It's more, we would be able to delegate leadership to ourselves, and we wouldn't have one person being a leader. I mean, this is, if I just take this curve and I see this all the way to its end, then that's where I see this going, where we will be in charge of making decisions for ourselves. So it's not like we're gonna just not talk to each other and just be in different microcosms away from each other, but more so just we'll be in a position where we can make decisions that impact all of us, and we'll be able to like have a healthy discussion in a way that allows us to do it.
Wow. Decentralized leadership. So like every single one of us becomes and plays a small role in this entire leadership process, like that 5 computers that keep track of this transaction, for example.
Exactly. So if you define a state of a blockchain to be what are the economic decisions for the most of the people, and then you allow people to vote on it, and then you can only change the state based on a majority. So you can define majority to be whatever the majority defines it to be too, So you can play with all these different variables, and you can ultimately just let people set those variables to be what they want it to be.
So ultimately, even in a decentralized world, we can manipulate the results of like polls and like assume things that are not necessarily, democratic in nature. Are you saying that we can actually manipulate the decentralized world as well?
Well, no, I think that would be up to the people. So if the people get swayed by something that allows, that makes them, go ahead and make a decision that's not in their own favor, they will be able to make that, but that's the problem of freedom, right?
Wow. Pretty tough one. So let's move on to Pujix here about this whole notion, because I'm really baffled by the topic of the decentralized world, because it does have a lot of potential, not only economically, but also politically. So what do you think about the impact of the decentralized world in our daily lives in the coming decades? Because as Gowan mentioned, this whole trend is just getting started. So Pujix, how do you think this wave of the decentralization will actually affect us in our daily lives, in our work, in our business, with our family and friends?
The most important aspect for me is that we get to monitor things, and this is a personal notion. It's not necessarily the most important thing, but for me, the idea of open source and decentralization, not necessarily just blockchain in general, open source, helps a lot. For example, if we let like the idea of artificial intelligence and machine learning go to like specific like the government entities, then we wouldn't have any oversight necessarily over them, and we wouldn't know how it works, how it pans out. But now it doesn't work like that. We have literally thousands of machine learning algorithms working, different sort of AIs working around the world. So to put this in contrast, if we had that government without having open source or a bunch of governments, we would have a nuclear situation. We would have very few but extremely powerful AIs that could create the dystopian scenarios in Hollywood potentially. Wow. But now there are many AIs in the world. So there is no one bad AI that we can, like, I'm pretty sure with I'm so reluctant, but I can say almost 100% the dystopian versions of Terminator cannot happen because there's no one AI in the world that can lead the charge. Wow. And that's one of the benefits. Basically, you're distributing the power. You're not letting the power come to a center, because as we all know, power brings corruption if it's too focused.
That's right.
So the idea is we want to shatter this into smaller pieces and scatter it around the world.
Fantastic. Exactly. So, Gowan, what do you think in terms of the impact of the decentralization around the world?
I think this would allow for one thing that's really kind of holding technology as a sector behind is regulation. Regulation is is miles behind the tech that we actually have to take Puya's point forward. We have we can put entire industries out of work if we choose to right now.
Wow.
For example, we could take the field of law, and you run a model that just looks at all the past case history given a certain jurisdiction or a certain legal problem, and you can just create a model that probably gives you the best legal defense to go about it.
Wow.
It's just a matter of whether regulation wants this to happen. Maybe regulation should be delegated to the people, or to regulation itself should be data driven. These are different possibilities that we need to consider, because the one thing we can agree on is the conventional way of doing things is just not good enough at this point.
Wow. And you mentioned this, and I just literally thought of one word, and that's disruption. So you mentioned earlier about how all of this will then disrupt many industries and so on and so forth. So let's talk about the negative aspect of it. I mean, like in this show, we like to look at things from both positive and negative aspects and their pros and cons. So Pujix, could there be any cons to this whole keychain technology, decentralization, and so on and so forth? Could there be any downside to it that could affect our societies around the world in a negative way?
Look, I mean, when it comes to these things, I look at for example, ideologies or ways of doing stuff, or all of this as tools, basically, that you use to achieve a goal. So with any tool, you can use it in any way you want. You can weaponize it, you can destroy things, or you can actually use it for positive. There's so many debates nowadays that actually democracy is being held hostage. The democracy is being used as a means to destroy the world, or some sort of like that. I'm not saying it's necessarily true. I'm saying like there is a negotiation about that. So yes, of course, there's going to be potential for misuse, but because there is a negative about it, I wouldn't dismiss it, because there's a negative about everything. And if we were to dismiss things because of their negatives, we would have to all go and die, essentially, and not live.
Exactly.
So my point is, yes, be wary of the negatives. Make sure that you're in control of them, they're not in control of you. Focus on the positive and build on that.
Fantastic.
But yes, there are potentials of of course, but with all of this, we can disrupt industries, we can put people out of jobs and all that, and that's a very big concern for sure. But then what people are missing about industry disruption is that we're going to have things that we don't have, and people are saying like, what am I going to do? What is my job going to be? My answer is, I don't know. They haven't been invented yet.
Wow. Your jobs. Just think about this. Like literally, think of like a couple decades ago, you'd ask your daddy, so Daddy, what should I do with my life? And he'd give you all the answers. Now they ask you, what's my job? Like, dude, your job hasn't yet been invented. So just wait for a while. Just pretty amazing. So let's move on to Govins. What do you think about the downside of the decentralized approach towards our economies using technologies such as keychain and so on and so forth?
Well, I don't think in any point in human history we've had any kind of disruptive change that's not been 2 steps forward, 1 step backward, or something like that. And I think it's the same with this. We need to deal with the problem of people potentially not being employed. But I about this specific problem, I think that this is where we really have a chance to move forward as a civilization, because right now people are doing degrees about things they don't care about to get jobs that they don't care about. But this is the only thing that they can do, that they have to do, because they want money, and money is the way that you can kind of survive. So with blockchain, you can decentralize more, like you can find a way to make money for things they're going to do anyway, create a gig economy. What I'm personally trying to do with my venture is create a gig economy of data, where you get paid. You're constantly going to have data. Data is a part of living, if you can have a way to sell that to companies, and then allow companies to make decisions that might ultimately come back to benefit you, you're getting a win out of it.
Let me just stop you right now for a second, Govin, because you mentioned about selling big data and stuff. And I really believe that the majority of your clients, because you work with big data are not sold to, let's say, the average consumer or the guy who just bought his new iPhone. Generally again, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm assuming that the majority of your clients are either advertising companies or governmental organizations. Am I right?
Well, for data-driven decisions, it could be anyone trying to do anything. If I owned a store that sold like shoes or something, and I find out my sales haven't been as good as in this quarter as the last quarter, I could just look at the data and then run it through a model, and then it'll tell me which variables have been changed. Like the computers can look at complex patterns that we just simply cannot comprehend as humans. So I think it's not just those big enterprises that the big enterprises are the ones that have access to it so far. It's just if we give that access to everyone, we'll all be in the same playing field.
Interesting. So you want to do what is currently available only to big organizations and let's say government organizations to the average person, like an average entrepreneur can have access to these data.
That's right.
Very nice. Interesting.
Exactly.
Pretty good. I think it's very, very useful in that regard and can help a lot of people. But the other problem you mentioned, selling shoes and whatnot. So if people are out of job and they have no money, who the hell is going to buy those pair of shoes, man?
Well,
Then you want to sell the data to this guy. I mean, this guy cannot sell a goddamn pair of shoes, man. Nobody's buying. They don't have any money.
No, they'll be selling their data to get money, or not just data. They could sell their time to do certain tasks. Like this is the real power of what's being called the gig economy or the sharing economy. I share my car and I make some money out of it. I share my house and make some money out of it. I share my time buying groceries for someone else and I make some money out of it. I think that's the kind of future we're moving to, and I think that's
I understand. You're totally right about this, and I like this technology. But my problem is, in basic economic terms, we have this thing called recycling of money. So if in an economy money is not being recycled, then there will be no economic transactions, and this will ultimately collapse the economy. So my question to you is this. You are solving all these problems. You are giving the data to this guy who sells shoes and whatnot. But if this entire technology disrupts our economies, disrupts employment, and more people are out of job and out of money, so what will that happen to the economy? What will all these people without job who cannot in any way add value do with their time and with their lives? And how can they actually contribute to this economy?
Can I jump in here?
Absolutely. Go ahead.
So one thing that this guy without a job is doing, contributing in a sense, is that he's selling his data to the shoemaker.
Exactly. Yeah.
So that's one thing.
But how is he being compensated? Is he being paid for it or not?
Yeah. Yeah. He's being paid for it.
By the shoemaker,
which is what is being like this. This is the kind of things that you can do using blockchain technology. In fact, that's the use case that I'm doing right now, where people sell their data to companies.
Wow!
And actually make some money out of it.
So in the future, we will actually have a job called selling your datas, right?
Yeah, it's not even a job. It's just an app that's running on your computer, and you just you give it some data. You can look at some companies and you say, okay, I want to give them my data, not those guys. Screw those guys,
And and they pay you for it by Bitcoin or something.
Exactly. Well, that's something we're still trying to figure out because, again, going back to the very volatile exchange rate, you can't really incentivize people at this point using cryptocurrency. So maybe you'd still have to pay them with some kind of fiat money.
One more question, because I know this is being currently used by a lot of the big data companies. So you mentioned these guys can then willingly, and the keyword here is willingly share their data with these companies and be compensated for it in terms of, let's say, cash or let's say Bitcoin. But let's be honest, you and I both know that this technology is now so advanced that you can easily steal the data of this company. I mean, let's be honest. If you read the book, Future Crimes, we all know that companies like Facebook and Google, they are already stealing our data. I mean, I don't remember the last time I got a, bill to pay to Google or Facebook for using Google and Instagram. I mean, these guys are already, stealing our data and without our permission.
Can I jump in again?
For sure. Go ahead.
Can I jump in again? So one thing that comes to my mind right now is that exactly. So your data is being given to these big guys without even being paid. Now you got to choose to sell to the smaller guys and actually getting paid.
Yeah, so exactly. You guys are acting as middlemen. You're removing and you're getting rid of this monopoly of these big companies.
Exactly. Yeah, they're gonna keep mining your data. They're gonna keep doing their thing. But here we're giving a chance for people to have some kind of ownership over their data. Our idea was born out of the Cambridge Analytica problem, mainly out of the fact that the big companies are only gonna help out the big companies. So it's up to us to enable the small guys to help each other out, and maybe try to create something bigger.
Wow. Love it, man. That's a great idea, actually. And if you ever wanted an investor, you can count on us because that's a very, very great idea. And I think it has a great future. So overall, now that we've talked about the basics of the decentralized world and so on and so forth, let us now talk about its application in our daily lives and our plans. So first of all, Pujix, when do you think this whole thing will affect our lives? Is it anytime soon, or are we going to have to wait for like a couple of decades?
No, I think it will, like, I personally believe we will see the very first impacts of this decentralized world and blockchain technology. In general, the decentralized world, I don't want to limit it to anything. I think we're going to see we've seen it already, but then the very real impacts on day-to-day lives, I think, will be seen somewhere in 20s. It's my personal belief that's my prediction. I might be wrong, but then,
so in a matter of years,
it might be late 20s, but I don't think it's going to take decades. I don't think it's going to be that far out. If everything goes according to, again, if I follow the curve as it's going so far, I think it's going to be very soon. Yeah.
Fantastic. Govind, what do you think about this, given the fact that you're the expert in this issue?
Well, I gotta say, I agree with Pujix, because people are making such high, like, long-term predictions for all these crazy tech. Like, even with quantum computers, they said then there's a 128 qubit quantum computer that's going to take a minimum of 5 years, and boom, it's coming out later this year.
Wow.
You know, so disruption is just happening at such a rapid pace, because I think we've never in history had like such a congregation of like intelligent people talking to each other, you know, so they're all helping each other out. Everyone's getting the resources, you know. So maybe something, I think for blockchain specifically, it's a matter of people's trust and fixing that problem. So once they realize that it's not something that's, you know, going to scam them out of their money, or it's actually going to add value to their lives and to everyone's lives as a whole, then they're going to slowly start jumping onto it. It's going to be a slow process, but it's up to companies with good integrity to you know, just keep doing their thing, and ultimately that should pay off. I mean,
if I can also add to that notion of, you know, technology predictions, specifically technology, but the future predictions. The problem with these mispredictions, giving it a long time, is that we as humans are wired to think linearly. All these disruptions are happening exponentially.
Exactly.
Not seeing the curve like growing. So, for example, in the second decade of 21st century, well, it's not finished yet, but our prediction is that it's the growth of technology and industries has been equal to the entire 20th century.
Wow.
Like nobody sees that.
Oh my goodness.
And think of that. The 20s will be even bigger.
That's so true.
That's like 100 years condensed into 20 years. It's only just started.
Just amazing, quite frankly. And I also like the part where Govind talked about big companies and integrity. I've never heard the word big companies and integrity to be used in the same sentence. That was pretty amazing to hear in that regard, because that's exactly what we're seeing nowadays. And I'm so glad that people like Govind will actually create companies that will allow individual users to actually be able to willingly share their own data to whomever they want. That's a great way to go forward. So before we go for the wrap up,
that's the key.
That's right. My last question is about the tip we want to give to our listeners to prepare themselves for this decentralized world that we will inevitably face in the years to come. So, Pujix, what is one tip you got for all of our listeners to prepare themselves for this huge change of events and this disruption that will inevitably hit us in the coming years, if not even earlier than that?
Yeah, this might not necessarily be an advice, but then a notion that, you know, obviously there's always going to be bad players, but don't rule out a technology or an idea because of the bad players. Be vigilant. Go learn more before making a conclusion.
Exactly.
Trust these technologies. Like, I'm not saying every single technology, and I'm not saying every single guy. I'm saying go learn more before you make a conclusive decision, because as Govind mentioned, for example, with blockchain specifically, we are already there technologically. The only matter is matter of the trust of the people and creating regulations that actually can work for the people in general and bringing it to their lives. So it can be used very usefully today, but we can't because people are not trusting the system for very good reasons.
But
then point is, go after it, learn more a little bit, read a couple of articles, books, or whatever you can get your hands on.
Fantastic. And Govind, what is your tip for basically our listeners to prepare themselves for this decentralized world?
Well, Pujix took the words out of my mouth. I was just gonna say, if you wanna make a decision on whether you're gonna invest anything, be it your time, your money, or anything to something, you need to know what you're faced with. And it's if you get screwed over, it's bad on the person who screwed you over's part, but it's also bad on your part for not having done the due diligence to realize that there was a chance you would get screwed over. So it's really a matter of putting in the time to like reading up on these things and knowing what you're investing something into.
Fantastic. Great show. Learn a lot, basically. I moved from a guy who did not know the difference between keychain and blockchain to a guy who actually understood a lot of these things. That was quite amazing. And thank you so much, Govind, for this great show. So first, Pujix, I want to thank you for all these things. Before we go any further, though, let's hear your final comments.
Yeah, the same. Just trust the process. I was like, there's this guy. I think it was in, I don't know, NHL or something. There was this coach in one of the sports I don't remember, who would basically tell his players, just trust the process. You might see bad results, but trust the process. The process is good in this respect, in this specific area. Just trust the process. There's going to be bumps on the road, but then trust the process and learn.
Fantastic. Govind, what is your final comment after being on the show for the first time?
Well, I really enjoyed this, and I hope I added value to someone listening to this day, or in terms of knowledge. And check out our website at datax.one for updates on how we're coming along. I hope to. Would
you say it one more time? Would you say the link? DataX? What's that?
Datax.one, O-N-E, D-A-T-A-X.
That's right.
O-N-E.
O-N-E. Fantastic. So thank you very much for being here with us, Govind. We really appreciated you being here. And of course, Pujix, thanks for arranging the entire thing. And I truly thank both of you guys for your amazing performance on the show. It was great to have you guys with us.
Thank you, Dan.
My pleasure. And of course, that's all the time we have for. It was a pleasure to be with you all. As always, we're here with you every Saturday. And if you have any comments, please leave them on our website. We're available on all major platforms, including iTunes, Google Play, basically Podbean and YouTube. And it was a pleasure to be with you guys. Thank you very much. This is Daniel Mulligan, and this was Beyond the Present Podcast.